10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast, episode 256. Hey everybody, welcome back yet again to another episode of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. This is episode 256, and we are going to again be talking about how to play more interesting lines. Last week we talked about some call and response, and this week we are going to jump into some more harmonic material. This time we're going to talk about how you can change the notes in your lines rather than the rhythms to make them more interesting. So as usual, I've got some new people to thank, and I wanted to remind everybody that this is a listener-supported podcast, and the way that you could support this show directly is by visiting our Patreon page. And for a small monthly donation, you can make sure that this show keeps coming at you in high quality each and every week, and also get some amazing jazz education materials in return, including PDFs and audio examples for every single episode that we have ever done. So in order to find the sign up page for Patreon, just go to our website, 10minutejazzlesson.com, click on one of the Patreon banners. It'll bring you over, give you all the instructions on how to sign up, and you will get instant access to all those materials the second you are signed up. So I wanted to give a shout out to the new patrons. Thank you to our new $3 patrons, Jens and Sam. And I also want to give a big shout out to our new $5 patrons, Raymond and Alec. Thank you guys so much for joining up. And of course, as always, thank you to everybody that's been with us for weeks, months, years. You really are the people that keeps this show coming at you. 10minutejazzlesson.com, click on one of the Patreon banners, get signed up today. So last week we were talking a little bit more on a phrase level. We were talking about how to compose a phrase using a question and answer format. And what that came down to was a lot of rhythmic stuff, plus like some directionality, whether it was ascending or descending. This week, what we're going to talk about is taking a diatonic line, something that is not the most interesting thing in the world, and by way of altering it, turn it into something that might be a little bit more harmonically interesting to play and for the listener. And this would be a great way to start to incorporate some more tension into your lines, even if you're not comfortable sitting down and just trying to write like a really advanced line right off the bat. The cool thing about this process is that you can sit down and write a very basic line, one that doesn't really have any alterations or tension, and then start to add that stuff in one by one. And I can tell you from personal experience that this is a really great way to grow as a musician. And this is something that I do on a weekly basis, even though I feel like at this point in my playing career, I could actually sit down and I have the skills to write a harmonically challenging line from a blank page. Even though I feel like I can do that, I've worked hard enough to do that, I still really like using this method to come up with some brand new sounds, okay? So let's dive into this. We're gonna look at the PDF and we're gonna look at example number 1. Now what I've done is I've written an entirely diatonic 2-5-1 lick in the key of concert C major. And what you're gonna hear is the first line that you will hear is pretty plain. It's pretty vanilla. That doesn't mean that it's a bad thing. It just means that I'm not doing anything adventurous over this first example. So what I want to do is play this for you a couple of times just so you can hear what it sounds like, what I came up with, the structure of it. And then we're going to talk about how I went back and revised it and added some tension and some harmonically challenging thinking to the actual line. So let's listen to the plain old original line first. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, as I said, there's nothing wrong with playing a simple line. I mean, we talked about that all month last month, how Miles Davis likes to do that. So if Miles Davis can do it and it works for him, it can definitely work for us. So I don't want you to misconstrue what I'm saying that, simple is bad, but I'm just talking about trying to reach sort of the next level in your playing if you want to reach for that more harmonically complicated stuff. So what we heard is that it was all diatonic. There was nothing that kind of made us raise our eyebrows or give a big woo, as jazz musicians like to do when they hear something interesting. It's a pretty plain line. So my process for you this particular week is to go back through that line and try to identify places where I can change the note, raise it or lower it by a half step, and try to come up with something that's a little bit more harmonically adventurous. So what I've come up with on this first lick is as follows. Let's listen to it first, and then I will go through and tell you exactly what I did. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so you can definitely hear that I changed some stuff. So let's go through it. Have your PDF in front of you. And what I've done is on the second line, I've put in red, I've color-coded in red the notes that I changed. Okay, so the first one that you will notice is on beat 2 of the first measure. Instead of using the regular old flat 7 over the 2 chord, I'm now using the leading tone, and it is leading me back to the root, but now I'm using the leading tone, which doesn't technically fit, but depending on how you use it, it can sound great. So I'm doing that on beat 2 of measure 1, and then I change a bunch of stuff in measure 2 over the 5 chord. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to give this plain old 5 chord more of an altered feel. So you'll notice the and of 1 goes from the 4th now to the sharp 11th. Beat 2 is a sharp 5 instead of a regular old 5. Then on the and of 2, I go back to that sharp 11. And then on the and of 3, I'm using the flat 9. So this is really giving it a bit more of an altered sound. You will notice that all those notes I changed happen to fit into the altered dominant scale. Okay. And then in the 1 chord, so in measure 3, on beat 3, instead of using the regular old major third, I'm flatting that, and now I'm using the minor third over a major chord, which is going to give it a very, very different sound. Okay, it's going to give me a little bit more of that blues feeling. So I used the leading tone in measure 1, I used an altered sound in measure 2, and I used that minor third in place of the major third in measure 3. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to play the 2 lines back to back so that you can hear the stark difference between the 2. Let's check that out. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. One, two, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so hopefully you can hear the difference, and maybe you like the first one more. That's totally fine. But the second one, no doubt about it, is a little bit more adventurous, and it's based off of the exact same notes, just with some adjusting. All right, example number 2. All I did was I used a dominant chord, a plain old dominant chord for 4 measures, and we're going to explore this again. So let me play the first line, the diatonic one, for you, and then we will talk about what I changed. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. One, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. So again, pretty plain, nothing wrong with that, but definitely all diatonic, not very adventurous. So now let's listen to what I did to alter this, and then we'll chat about it. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. So very, very different, a lot more tense. Let's talk about exactly what I was thinking about when I started to alter that one. So this is example number 2 on your PDF. Again, you've got the red notes that are sort of telling you what I am doing differently. So in measure 1, you will notice that I went from regular old diatonic dominant chord to more of a whole tone sound. And I achieved that by using the sharp 11 instead of the 4. And then I used the sharp 5 instead of the regular 5. Then you will notice again on the and of 3, I'm using that sharp 11 again. And what this does is it gives us this whole tone sound where everything is a whole step apart and we get some really, really nice tense notes. Now, what I did in the second measure is I kind of pivoted a little bit. So instead of using that whole tone sound, I went to a little bit more of like a diminished dominant sound. So now I'm incorporating the flat 9. So in measure 2 and of 2, you'll notice I'm using the sharp 11 again. And then on beat 4, measure 2, I'm using the flat 9. And then in measure 3 on beat 2, I'm using the sharp 11 again. So what that's really telling you, what that sort of is conveying to you, is I'm trying to use more of a diminished sound. So I start off the line by conveying a whole tone sound to you. And then right after that, I switch out of that whole tone mode and go into diminished mode. And I think that that is a lesson in itself, right? You can transfer in and out of these different flavors, these different colors over a dominant chord. And in this line is a perfect example of that kind of thing. I like the whole tone sound. I like the diminished sound. There's no reason that I can't use both in the same phrase. So now what I want to do is play both of the lines back to back. And I think you will notice a really stark difference in example number 2. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. One, two, 1, 2, 3, 4. So I hope you notice those different sounds. Those really, really stand out to me as being very, very different. So what I want you to do is I want you to do this exercise, write one sort of vanilla line over the first 2-5-1, then alter it. Try to come up with an interesting way to shift some notes, some key notes to convey a different vibe, a different color. And then I want you to do the same thing over the 4-bar dominant pattern. I want you to come up with something that's really, really simple, stays right inside, and then something that takes you a little further out that's a little bit more interesting. But don't stray from the original line. So spend some time writing the original line in a way that you're really happy with it. And then you want to stick with that, but just, raise and lower certain pitches to use some tensions. That might sound good to you. Okay? Post your lines that you write on the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Community Facebook group. We would all love to see those. That really encourages everybody else to do the homework as well. And remember to join up to the Patreon. If you like the show, if you like what we're bringing to you, go to 10minutejazzlesson.com, click on one of the Patreon banners, get signed up, and get instant access to all those materials. Thanks for listening, everybody, and thanks to all the patrons that are making this show possible. And we will talk to you soon. Stay safe and healthy, everybody. Bye.